Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at how Standard Chartered Bank really managed to expand its digital banking services so effectively across some very diverse emerging markets.
It really is a fascinating story
Hmm.
because they didn't just roll out a standard global plan. They went incredibly local, fundamentally changing their strategy.
Right.
And, for you listening, there are some genuinely useful takeaways here about how to understand any market, really,
Yeah,
and build things people actually want and need.
absolutely. And we're basing this discussion on a recent piece from Cognitive Market Research. It's pretty detailed about their research methods and, more importantly, what they found.
Yeah, the outcomes.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to pull out those key strategies, the big findings, and maybe some of those surprising adaptations that really drove their success. Okay, so the article makes it clear from the start. Localized research was absolutely central for Standard Chartered.
Precisely. Before they even thought about launching digital services in places like Nigeria, Kenya, India, Indonesia,
Hmm.
they went deep, really deep.
How deep are we talking?
Well, ethnographic studies, actually spending time seeing how people lived, how they handled money day to day, plus focus groups, getting that direct feedback.
On needs, problems.
Yeah, pain points. And very detailed surveys on mobile phone usage. This wasn't just surface level stuff.
And interestingly, all that groundwork led to something a bit unexpected, didn't it? This huge focus on simplicity, trust, and data efficiency.
It really did.
Yeah.
Almost the opposite of what banks often push in developed markets where it's all about packing in features.
So simplicity first.
Absolutely. And you can see how they acted on it. They didn't try to build these massive, complex apps. They focused on the absolute essentials.
Like what specifically?
Take the SE mobile launch in Côte d'Ivoire. The article mentions it offered core things: opening an account, transfers, paying bills, mobile top-ups.
The basics people really need.
Exactly. And crucially, it was designed to run smoothly on the kind of lower-end Android phones that most people actually have there. That shows real understanding of the technical ground reality.
It does. And it wasn't just the phones, right? The research also showed how people were managing money already, often using mobile wallets.
Yes, using mobile wallets alongside maybe more traditional banking, if they used it at all. So Standard Chartered was smart. They integrated with popular local platforms.
Like M-Pesa in Kenya. That's huge then.
Exactly. M-Pesa in Kenya, bKash in Bangladesh. They plugged into systems people already knew and trusted.
Stepping back, it just hammers home that you can't use a one-size-fits-all approach in these situations.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
What works in London or New York might just completely fail or be totally irrelevant somewhere else.
That initial deep research really let them build something that felt right from the start.
It gave them that foundation.
Okay.
So they understood the need for simplicity. But the research also highlighted another big thing: low formal banking penetration. Lots of people just weren't banked.
Right. A challenge, but also a massive opportunity, I suppose.
Precisely. So Standard Chartered set a clear goal: use digital banking to bring the unbanked and underbanked into the formal system.
And the research helped pinpoint why people weren't banked.
It did. They talked directly to non-customers. And the big barriers that came up were things like really long, complicated sign-up processes.
Paperwork nightmares.
Totally. Plus, rigid KYC, know your customer rules, and often just a basic mistrust of banks.
Okay, so how did they tackle those?
Well, the article points to their shift towards paperless, fully digital onboarding, using things like biometric verification, linking up with national ID databases.
Making it smoother.
Much smoother. But, critically, doing it in a way that complied with each country's specific rules. You can't ignore the local regulations.
No, absolutely not. Is there an example of how that worked?
Yeah, Ghana. They got the account opening time down to under 15 minutes. All you needed was your mobile number and your national ID card. Think about the difference that makes.
That's a huge reduction in friction.
Huge. And in Pakistan, they didn't go it alone. They teamed up with local fintechs
To do what?
to create really simple products. Things like low-cost savings accounts, microloans, specifically designed for people using a bank for the very first time.
So it's about tailoring the product, not just the process.
Exactly. And even tailoring to cultural needs. The research picked up strong demand for Islamic banking features in places like the UAE and Malaysia.
And they added those?
They did. They built Sharia-compliant options right into the digital platform. It shows they were really listening.
It really begs the question, doesn't it? For any business, how well are you actually listening to what different customer segments need?
Standard Chartered's story shows how that deep listening directly leads to products and processes that work, especially for people who've been excluded before.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly. What about the app itself? The user interface, the whole experience of using it, that's got to be crucial, especially for first-time digital users.
Absolutely critical. And again, research was key. In places like Uganda and Bangladesh, they found people strongly preferred visuals, icons, things like that, over dense text. And local languages, of course.
That makes sense. Less intimidating if you're not used to complex apps.
Much less. So Standard Chartered acted on it. They redesigned the UI for those markets. More icons for navigation, simplified the sign-up flow even further, and, crucially, offered support in multiple local languages.
It's not just about function, it's about familiarity and ease. But what about trust? You mentioned mistrust earlier. How did they build trust in an app from a big foreign bank?
Yeah, that skepticism was real. So their communication couldn't just be generic corporate stuff. It had to be highly targeted.
How so?
They ran campaigns using local influencers, well-known figures people already trusted. And they used testimonials, real stories from actual customers in those regions.
Making it feel more relatable, more credible,
Exactly. And they got quite technical with it too, using A/B testing.
to optimize the messaging.
Yeah, testing different wording, different colors, different calls to action to see what really resonated in each specific market.
Do you have examples of that tailored messaging?
The article mentions emphasizing saving and investing for your family in India, which taps into strong cultural values there. Whereas in parts of Africa, the focus might be more on empowering small business owners.
So it's about understanding the why behind the what, the cultural context.
Precisely. You can't just translate, you have to transcreate. You need to connect with underlying values to build that essential trust and get people engaged.
Makes sense. Now, beyond the users and the app design, there's the whole operating environment. Regulations, infrastructure, that can be a real patchwork in emerging markets.
Oh, absolutely vital. You could have the best app in the world, but if the internet is unreliable or the regulations trip you up, you're stuck.
So how did Standard Chartered research that side of things?
They did serious homework. Lots of interviews with regulators to understand the legal landscape. They mapped out the whole tech ecosystem, who are the key telecom players, what's the network quality like, and they benchmarked themselves against competitors, both local and regional banks.
Getting the full picture.
Right. And this let them tackle problems proactively. For instance, knowing about spotty internet in parts of Kenya or Pakistan.
What did they do about that?
They actually optimized the app for some offline functionality. So users could still do certain basic things even without a constant connection. Maybe queue transactions to sync later.
Clever. Thinking ahead.
And dealing with things like data localization laws, rules saying customer data has to stay within the country. That often means big investments.
They made those investments?
They did. Building local data centers, working closely with the authorities. It shows they weren't just dipping a toe in, they were making a long-term commitment.
And did this research uncover anything else, maybe future trends?
Interestingly, yes.
Yeah.
They picked up on growing interest in environmental sustainability, especially among younger city dwellers.
Really? Even alongside basic banking needs?
Yeah. So Standard Chartered started integrating things like carbon footprint calculators into the app, promoting paperless statements, aligning with those emerging values.
So the research wasn't just about solving today's problems, but also about spotting what's coming next.
Exactly. It's about staying relevant and potentially gaining an edge by anticipating where consumer values are heading.
It's really clear that for Standard Chartered, this research wasn't just a project they did at the start and then stopped.
No, not at all. The article really stresses this shift to continuous feedback. It became an ongoing process
How did they manage that?
through multiple channels. Things like quick in-app surveys, regular focus groups, active social media listening, even using AI to analyze customer comments and sentiment online.
So constantly taking the pulse.
Constantly. And they tracked key metrics really closely. Net Promoter Score NPS was a big one.
Which measures customer loyalty, basically.
You're right. But they didn't just look at the overall score. They broke it down by region, even by specific services within the app.
Wow, that's granular.
Very. And that level of detail allowed them to be really agile. They could pinpoint issues quickly, prioritize updates, and roll out improvements targeted at specific countries or user groups.
Got any examples of insights from that ongoing monitoring?
Yeah, the article mentions finding strong demand for automated budgeting tools among users in Nigeria. But in Indonesia, there was more interest in getting information about cryptocurrencies.
See, again, very different needs, even within emerging markets.
Exactly. You can't assume uniformity. And this continuous data stream didn't just help fix problems, it helped spot opportunity.
About new markets.
Precisely. The data helped them identify places like Vietnam and Egypt as having high potential for digital banking growth, which informed their expansion strategy.
So it becomes a cycle. Research informs action, action generates data, data informs the next wave of research and action.
That's the idea, using data proactively to stay ahead of the curve, not just react.
We've covered a lot, but there's one stat from the article that really jumps out.
What's that?
It says Standard Chartered saw a 50% jump in purely digital customer acquisition across Asia and Africa between 2021 and 2023. 50%. And get this. Mobile banking channels accounted for over 65% of all new retail accounts in those areas.
Okay, those numbers really drive it home, don't they?
They really do. It shows this research-led, locally focused approach wasn't just theory. It delivered serious results. Growth, market share.
Yeah, it clearly demonstrates that their commitment to really understanding and adapting paid off significantly.
So if we were to boil it all down, Standard Chartered's success story here wasn't just about tech. It was fundamentally about deep, ongoing local research.
Absolutely. And using that research to design things people could actually use and trust. User-centric design in the truest sense.
Plus, being flexible enough to navigate all those different infrastructure issues and regulations.
And committing to that continuous learning loop. Always listening, always adapting.
And for you listening, the big takeaway isn't really just about banking, is it?
Not at all. It's about that core principle. Truly know your audience, whoever they are. Respect the local context, the realities on the ground, and be ready, genuinely ready, to change your plans based on what you learn.
Absolutely. So maybe here's a final thought to chew on. How could these ideas, that deep research, that tailoring to local needs, apply in your world, whether it's business or maybe even a community project or a personal goal?
Yeah, what are those subtle, maybe overlooked details in your own situation that could actually be the key to unlocking success?
Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.